I'm Barbara DeMarco-Barrett. I'm president of the Orange County chapter of Sisters in Crime. Sisters in Crime was founded in 1986 to promote the ongoing advancement, recognition, and professional development of women crime writers. Today, the organization boasts 4,200 members and more than 60 chapters worldwide. And its initiatives also include scholarships, grants for academic research into the roles of women and underserved voices in crime fiction, cash awards to libraries and bookstores, and surveys and monitoring projects, which determine visibility and representation of women and diverse voices in the genre and across the marketplace. Sisters in Crime welcomes everyone who supports our mission to promote the ongoing advancement, recognition, and professional development of women crime writers. If you want to find more out about our chapter, it's ocsistersIncrime.org. We're here in Orange County, California. So today is the book launch for Crossing Borders. This is the book. A few of us contributors and a co-editor are here to talk about short story writing and hopefully interest you in buying a copy from our member bookstore, Mystery Inc. And there's info on Mystery Inc. down in the chat box. Moderating the panel is Chapter VP Maddie Margarita. Maddie is the host of Lit Up, OC, a monthly writer's salon right here in Orange County, and Character Floss, a podcast on Authors on the Air Global Network. When not writing, talking into a mic, or writing her current book, Maddie serves on the boards of Sisters in Crime OC and the Southern California Writers Association. Her short stories can be found in It's All in the Story, California, an anthology of short fiction. Without further ado, Maddie Margarita.
Hey everyone. Thank you, Barbara. I'd like to welcome everyone to our discussion today on the art of short story writing and the launch of Crossing Borders. Short story writing, AKA telling a complete and satisfying story that normally takes 400 pages in 10, or creating something that sounds really easy but is 99% of the time significantly more difficult. So to take some of the mystery out of that and to highlight some of the participants in Crossing Borders, we have a wonderful panel here today. We have co-editor Lisa Brackmann, the New York Times bestselling author of the Anthony Award Lefty Ellie McEnroe novels. I'm sorry, I should have put a comma there. Black Swan Rising, her latest book, deals with misogyny, mass shootings, and polarized politics. Her work has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, Travel and Leisure, Salon, Los Angeles Review of Books, and CNET. And 4 contributors. Barbara DeMarco-Barrett, who is president of our chapter, who did our introduction. She is the Los Angeles Times bestselling author of Pen on Fire, A Busy Woman's Guide to Igniting the Writer Within. Barbara's short stories and fiction have been featured in numerous publications and anthologies. We also have Carl Vonderau, author of Murderabilia, a thriller set in the upper crust world of private banking. An ex-banker, Carl has worked in Latin America, Canada, and North Africa, is a partner in San Diego Social Venture Partners, and serves on the board for the local chapter of Sisters in Crime in San Diego. We also have, Greta Boris, author of 7 Deadly Sins, a series of standalone novels of psychological suspense set in Southern California. And she also is the Amazon Kindle's bestselling author of The Wine and Chocolate Workout. Greta is co-author of Publish, Take Charge of Your Author Career and co-author of The Author Wheel. So do we have Kathy yet? Is Kathy on?
No,
all right. Okay,
I have not heard from her yet, but.
Okay. All right. So we're going to start from the beginning, which means we're going to put turn the camera over to you, Lisa. Can you talk a little bit about what it's like being an editor of an anthology, what they do, what you look for in the submissions you receive, and what kinds of things in stories stand out to you as an editor?
Well, this was going to be it's the first anthology from the San Diego Sisters chapter of Sisters in Crime, Partners in Crime. And, you know, of course, we had keyed the publication of this to coincide with Left Coast Crime in San Diego, and we all pretty much know what happened there. But we decided to go with the theme of crossing borders because, you know, one of the most interesting things to me as a native San Diegan is that this is a city on a literal border, and that this really shapes the character of the place more than I think a lot of people realize. Because at the same time, there's also a great deal of denial in certain parts of the city that we are on a border with another country. So it's a very interesting dynamic. We quickly expanded that theme from the literal, you know, stories that take place within a border. Oh, here, wait a minute. I think that's Kathy. No, right now. Someone else talk for a minute and I will tell her to get on right now.
Yeah, well, I think it's great to have you. It's a hard thing to come up with a theme that's inclusive enough or defined enough where people get a good idea of what it is, but expanded enough where you get enough people to be interested in writing it. So I was putting words in your mouth, so I'm going to turn it back over to you, Lisa.
We expanded that to any kind of a border, a physical border, a mental border, a psychological border, the border between life and death, the border between, even there's some stories with the supernatural element in them, the border between the supernatural and our world. And so we got a really wide range of stories dealing with different iterations of this border theme. And, you know, since we're a relatively new chapter, we opened it up to Orange County and Los Angeles chapters to keep it kind of Southern California focused. In terms of what we look for, I mean, I'm a pretty simple person in a lot of ways. I just want something that's well written, and beyond that, I don't really care. And, you know, to say that something is well written obviously encompasses a lot of things. It encompasses theme, it encompasses dialogue, it encompasses narrative, it encompasses the actual way that prose is put together. It encompasses plot, all of these different elements. But to me, as long as the story, you know, if there's something about it that holds my attention, that engages me, and that, as you said, it feels complete at the end of the story, which is a difficult thing to do. I mean, I've not really written that many short stories myself. And in a lot of ways, they are trickier than writing novels because you don't have that much time to get a lot of things across. But, you know, primarily what I looked for was quality. And beyond that, you know, both Matt and I, Matt Coyle was the other editor, we were really flexible. In terms of the editing process, one of the things that I've learned as a writer and as a frequent, you know, I've done a fair amount of editing and a fair amount of, you know, beta reading and that kind of thing. You really have to look at where the writer is, as opposed to, you have to look at where the writer is, what it is that they're trying to accomplish, and look for ways that you can help them do that. What you cannot do, and what too many people who are maybe not new to the editorial process, you know, or whatever, you can't impose the story that you would write onto the story that somebody else has written, which is a really common thing in my experience. You really have to look for what the writer is trying to accomplish and how you can help them realize their vision more fully. So it's a very different thing depending on the story. There were stories where, you know, it was literally, a lot of the time it was just like, okay, what are you trying to say here? What image? How can we increase the tension? Because again, you know, these are all crime fiction stories and tension's a real serious, you know, major part of it, you know. And with a short story, it can literally be the difference between something working and not working can be a sentence, you know? So, you know, it's really great if you're kind of a micromanager like I am, you know, and somebody that I approach writing on very much a sentence level. So that was how I approached editing these stories, was on a sentence level. Like, does each sentence contribute to what you're trying to do? How can it be better if it doesn't? Is there something missing that we need for added explanation or tension or effectiveness? And, you know, how are you telling this incident? You know, are you backfilling it, which is something that I, you know, I see with a lot of newer writers that they'll telegraph what it is that's going to happen, and then they go back and fill it in, which can be a real tension buster, you know. So it really is looking at things on a very granular level, I would say. So
I have a question for Lisa.
Go ahead.
yes.
So how many sentences would have to be off for you to reject the story? Or wouldn't that be a consideration? Would it be like, you know what, we'll fix that stuff?
I think it depends on the story, and it also, of course, depends on what your selection is. I mean, like, sure, at the end of the day, everybody wants to just get like a perfectly polished gem that you don't have to do any work on, right? I mean, we're lazy. I'd rather not have to do anything. But as long as there was something solid about, as long as the prose is competent, as long as there's an understanding of basically how to tell the story, because that's another thing that you see with new writers is a lot. There are writers have different levels of understanding and grasp on how to tell a story. I mean, for some people, it's completely natural. I know a woman who had never written a book, in her life or anything, and she just sat down one day and wrote a book, and I was like, well, hell. I mean, she just had a innate understanding, maybe from years and years of reading, who knows, of how to tell a story. I look at it as where to put the camera, right? So that's mostly it for me. It's not a matter of rejecting something because a few sentences are off. It's, does this person have a grasp of the storytelling process, and are they telling an interesting story?
I have a question as well. So in a short story, is there any element that has more weight than another, like character versus plot for you, or
I don't think so. I think it depends on the writer and the story that they're telling. I mean, if you look at this anthology, there are stories that are very literary. There are stories that are more plot driven. I think there's a lot of different ways to approach it, and it really, writers, people have different strengths as writers. So it's kind of like you can have somebody that is really, really good at crafting beautiful sentences, and they draw you in that way. And then you can have somebody else whose prose may be kind of prosaic, as it were, but who really understand how to construct a plot in a short amount of time. So I don't think there's any single element that's more important than other. It just depends on the writer and what it is that they're trying to do and what their particular strengths are.
So obviously the contributors or the people that are on the panel today know what they're talking about because their stories were selected. So we're going to start with Kathy. Kathy, where are you? There she is. Kathy,
Yay!
to introduce
you for being late. I had 2:30 on my calendar, so I'm glad.
That may have been my fault, so I'll take responsibility for that. I want to pronounce your last name correctly. So it's Krevat?
Yeah, it's Krevat, but we can do anything. So
okay, okay, Kathy Krevat. Okay, let me give you a quick introduction so everyone knows who you are. You're the author of the, and if I'm telling a lie, just keep it to yourself. The author of the Gourmet Cat Mystery Series. She also writes the best-selling chocolate-covered mystery series under the name Kathy Ahrens. When not writing, Kathy is volunteering with youth acts, education organizations, and performing stand-up comedy now via Zoom. Okay, so Kathy, in your story, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which I loved and surprised me at every turn, how did you manage to pack so many twists and turns and blind alleys and reversals into one short story, into, what was it, 10 or 12 pages?
Yeah, 12 pages.
12 pages, yeah.
Thank you, that's very, very kind of you to say. I actually wrote a pretty big proposal. I wanted this to be a novel originally a few years ago, and then when this opportunity came for Crossing Borders, I cut it way down and made it into a short story. So I actually was starting with a pretty detailed synopsis. And I still have the idea that maybe it could be a novel someday, but that was how it worked out for me. I have written some other short stories, and to me, I feel like maybe because I come from writing novels, I had never written short stories until a couple of years ago, well, college. That I think of it as a full-blown plot first, and then I take out kind of the, you have to get down to a certain word count, which when I'm writing novels, it's actually the opposite. I underwrite novels, but I overwrite short stories. So then you have to cut out all anything that isn't fluff for a short story. So.
So because it is so twisty and windy, how did you know what to cut out when you start out with so much? Because sometimes what you're thinking doesn't make it to the paper when you do that.
Right.
How did you go about or approach editing that and getting it to, distilling it into a short story?
Well, I did not have the full novel written, so it was more just along the plot. So I eliminated, so when I write a novel, I normally have 3 main suspects, you know, and then 3 clues that lead to them. But then I have some lesser suspects that have less of a reason for, you know, any type of motivation or opportunity or means. So I didn't even consider those. And then I kind of honed in on, you know, who I knew the villain was already, and then just took away anything that was kind of off to the side where it would sidetrack the reader, but I didn't really have the space for it, so the words for it.
Did you want to talk a little bit about the story, or just give everybody a sense of, I mean, we're talking about it like it's just a regular story, but it's very different. So
yeah, so it is actually about a flu demigod who arrives in a small town, supposed to be bringing death, and then finds out that the person it's supposed to kill is already dead. So then it gets intrigued by the mystery and solves the mystery. So, and then I kind of had to envision, you know, if this existed, how would they possibly solve a mystery and make sure that justice was done? So that's that's where I started with it. So
I mean, when you start with a kick-ass premise, I mean, that helps.
yeah.
But the execution is not always easy
Yeah.
to do that. So what was the hardest thing for you in writing this book, or writing the story rather?
Again, it was the cutting out and keeping it under 5,000. I think it came to like $49.99. I mean, it was very barely under the 5,000 word limit. So yeah, and then trying to envision how it might possibly be true and how it might possibly work. I mean, it's a really crazy idea. And then at some point I got the idea of, you know, the movie Ratatouille, where the rat is kind of controlling the chef. That's kind
I'm
of
embarrassed to say, yes, I know that movie. Yes.
Yeah, so that's kind of where I got, like, what could a tiny, you know, particle do to make a human, you know, pay attention to something? So
So can I pitch the novel? Can I pitch COVID-19 meets Ratatouille? Can I do that?
yeah. And then the third book in my Gourmet Cat series is about a college college admission scandal. And, you know, I wrote it a year before you know, it appeared in the news.
Oh.
So, yeah, so.
So we're going to read all your books from now on.
Yeah.
Did writing this short story help you? Do you feel, you said that the novel wasn't completed? Do you think you can go back now after writing the short story and forcing yourself to put all 3 acts into one story? Do you think it will be easier to finish that?
Well, it would be a completely different plot because I basically distilled the plot into the short story. And I have other projects going on, so I don't know where it is in the priority list. So I'm not going to finish that anytime soon.
All right.
So I also think it's a different environment out there. I don't know if people want to read a novel about a flu solving mysteries right now.
Well, we have a couple of people on the phone with us, video chat with us now. I don't know if anybody sees the little reaction emoji on the bottom of your screen. If you would read a mystery about a flu bug right now, or if you would buy that, be interested. Can you tap on that and give us an idea of who would be interested? We see that? You see little clapping hands and little things like that.
Bottom right. I think the bottom right, the reaction.
The bottom right of your toolbar. Right.
Yeah,
Oh, we've got a thumbs up from Claire. Okay, that's good. Okay, we got a couple of people on there. All right, so we're going to give you a lot of encouragement on that, Kathy.
Thank you.
All right, you know, it's also, and I think you share this with Carl. Carl's on here.
Yes.
Is we get a really good sense of your character, which is interesting because your character is not your usual protagonist in there. How did you go about approaching developing, making us relate to the flu bug? And then we'll go to Carl and talk about his character.
I wanted to make it so that he knows he's not, and say he knows he's not human, but he admires some parts of human. And my books are humorous, so I liked, adding that he does have a sense of humor, and he says a few funny things, especially at the beginning. So that's kind of the fact that he's centuries old. I mean, it's a character I've never even considered before because I write cozy mysteries, but just thought he would think completely differently than any character I've ever done. So I didn't have to think about physically what he looks like or, much about his. I mean, it's a surprise that he wants to solve this mystery anyway. So because his morals are completely different than a human. So it was just very different for anything I've ever done before.
Yeah, kind of like a love story.
A little bit.
There's
a
an
little
odd way.
Weirdo romance in there too.
In an odd way. All right. Speaking of odd ways, Carl, not that your character was odd in A Killing in Bogota, but he was definitely different and compelling in a way. His experience and his actions and whatever. Can you talk a little bit about the story and how you created him? And still made him relatable, even though he might not have been someone you would be anxious to have move in next door to you.
Well, he's a 12-year-old boy, and he's a street orphan. And I'm not much of a short story writer. This is actually my first published short story. So it came from a book I worked on a long time ago, which primarily took place in Bogota. And I thought this part of that book could function as a short story. And I got to talk to street orphans, and I got to talk to a faceless prosecutor there. And so these kids live very, very hard lives. The way you make it relatable is that he's just a child. He's a child doing a killing to survive on the street. And he cries, he thinks of his mother, he wants to have a better life. He's searching for a father figure. And those are all universally relatable.
And how you did such a good job of portraying him, but still keeping the plot and the story. How did you balance that? Because you have 10 or 12 pages, how do you go about balancing that so that people get a full experience when they read the story?
Well, my objective in the story was to take the point of view from the victim to the killer. So I had very short time to identify or to get sympathy for the victim, just a few pages. And then I had to gradually take the camera into the mind of the killer until you sympathize with him. And so each scene gets more and more into the mind of Antonio until by the end, you find out what really he's about.
So did you outline, did someone say something here? Okay. Did you outline that going into it? Or?
I did. Well, maybe I did a while ago, a long time ago. Yeah, I think I did because, each scene has a purpose. And some of the scenes I had to cut out because they just didn't bring the story along fast enough to Antonio.
Okay. And when you were writing this and you knew that it was going to be read and possibly selected for the anthology, what things were you keeping in your mind in terms of being important and having this story stand out?
Well, I looked at the theme, and crossing borders can work on a number of levels in this story. It takes place in Colombia, so that's crossing a border. It's the border between a child and a man who's a killer, or between innocence and killing. So there are all those borders that crossed. And I tried to be aware of that as I went through. The challenge too is to put in the right detail. so that you have a sense of where it is, but not too much detail, and all that detail helping portray the character and what the character is dealing with. So you have to do that balance between character, setting, and plot.
So if you had a choice, had to make a choice between either writing a short story or writing a novel to save your life, which would you rather do?
A novel. Yeah. I don't know. I think it's a really huge challenge to have a lot of movement in a short story for me, where you have the character move, you conceivably have a thematic movement in the story, plus, evoking all the senses. I prefer to work on a bigger canvas.
Yeah. It's funny, I was thinking, Lisa, I know you're a musician, and I think of the same thing when people are songwriters. It's hard to write a short story, but can you imagine writing a song that's 3 minutes and, having to do that? Does your writing, your novel writing, inform your story or your songwriting, or vice versa, or?
I think it's kind of exercise. Like I said, I'm kind of a sentence person, so how sentences sound are important to me. I think there's a certain in my writing, or at least I try to put it in there. I'm aware of them in paragraph. I want it to sound nice, right? If you were reading it out loud, or if you were looking at it, I want it to be balanced. I really do pay attention to, how something plays out rhythmically. So I think probably it's more the music influences my prose more than the other way around, for sure. And in a lot of ways, it's just it's a different part of your creativity in your brain. And I think it maybe it informs the other, but it also is just I think anytime you stimulate your creativity, regardless of what aspect of your creativity it is, you're helping other parts of your creativity, if that makes sense, because it gives you a different way to look at the creative process and like, well, how did I do this? Okay, well, how do I do that? If that makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the musicality of prose is really important to me. And then that's, structure in the page more than structure over a whole book, obviously, but in a chapter or something like that, yeah, especially because you really want it to have a rhythm.
Right. Which this could not have worked out better, because Barbara, my question for you.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you find that you have the same challenge in transitions when you write music? So you've got, this melodic or chord structure here, and you want it to go to this other chord structure over here. And how do you get from here to there?
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes. Because especially if you're trying to do something that's not just like 1-4-5 or 1-5-4 or whatever, that's a little bit out, harmonically. And it's funny because I work with, I've been doing some home recording. I've been learning that, and that's been really fun. And I've been working with an old musician buddy in Los Angeles who's a very educated musician. He's a guitar player, and he can shred like nobody's business, but he also understands music theory and structure and all of the kinds of things. And I'm just like, I can hum it. So it's just basically, and I know this isn't just a straight B major. There's this note over here that I want, and he translated. So that's how we've been doing it. Is like we'll get on the phone, and I will literally hum, parts and go like, what is that? Oh, it's this, and I'm like, okay,
Right.
But yeah, I'm pretty intuitive about how I approach most creative things, I think, and it's just kind of like, well, if it sounds okay, then it's okay, But yeah, I actually think transitions, music is transitions in writing, then the music is really helpful, because if you think of it that way, it's a feel again, and it's rhythm, and rhythm is just so important in establishing tension and all kinds of things that I think people don't always think about when they're reading or writing. But yeah,
I think
sense.
that
My cat started yowling. I was like,
So
I think that's really interesting though too, because when you approach a novel, you think of telling the story in words, and sometimes you concentrate on the words, where in a short story, you need to be disciplined enough to focus on the theme and how to do that. So that's interesting. And Barb, we were going to talk to you about pool fishing, which is another kick-ass premise. And before I ask you the question, where did that come from?
I really wish I could remember. I cannot remember where this story came from. I cannot remember. I've been racking my brain. If anybody out there who knows me remembers anything I said about it might have started in free writing, and then I needed to give it form with, it needed a setting, it needed a protagonist, and it needed a conflict, but I cannot remember where this came from. I know where the setting came from, but that's about it.
Well, that's one of the things I wanted to talk to you about. The story flowed so effortlessly, and this is back to what Lisa was talking about. It had a rhythm to it that stuck out, even though it wasn't distracting, but it had a feel. It's hard to describe. It had a rhythm to it. Maybe it was
Nice.
a life or something. It had a unique rhythm, and the setting fit in so perfectly to the story. Why don't you tell everybody what pool fishing is and talk a little bit about the story? You've written so many short stories, and how you wrote this one.
Well, pool fishing is about a woman who rescues things from the murky swimming pool in her apartment complex. It's sort of like a U-shaped two-story complex that Santa Monica has a lot of these places. And somehow I'm just entranced by them. I've never lived in one, but I just think they're so interesting because everybody's there in this U shape. And she rescues things from the pool, and she finds a beer bottle in the pool with, and this isn't a spoiler because it happens close to the beginning, with a note inside the beer bottle that says, "Help me." And so she is off on trying to figure out who threw the beer bottle in there and who needs help. So that's the story, but the setting was so important for the story. Setting is it's not everything, but it's a lot for me, because along with the setting, I think comes kind of a tone, like the tone of the apartment house. For me, the apartment complex very much had a tone to it, and that helped me kind of figure out who the character was and who the people were who lived there, right? It's a very transient place, and it's on the wrong side of town. And, I just love the setting. I've never lived there, but I love it.
And we were able to get such a strong sense of her lifestyle, and you had other characters around her. We got a sense of her love life, a little steamy, which is good, but not too steamy. But we got a sense of her full being in that 10 or 12 pages. How did you do that? I mean, when you approached writing it, did you write the story for the plot first and then write the character, or?
I think I used to write short stories. I haven't always worked this way. I used to just write and just see where it goes. And often it went nowhere, and I would have a story with a bunch of talking heads. Nothing would happen. And so now I really need some sort of conflict, like what is going to happen in this story? And even though it may go some other direction, I need somewhere I am writing toward. And so for this, I knew how I wanted it to, I knew what the climax was. I wasn't sure how to get there. But I needed those things. I needed a character that I really wanted to spend time with. And then I also, Jennifer in the chat is a student at one of my workshops, and she's talking about the A story, B story. So I really feel like that works for me too. The A story was, here's a character who rescues things from the swimming pool. What does she find there? What happens? And then the B story is her relationship with her boyfriend, the steamy part. And so, but I need those three things. I need character, setting, and a conflict to get going now. And if I have those three things, I can go somewhere with it. If one is missing, I can't do anything.
Okay. And what are you proudest of in this story?
Gosh, I don't know. That's an interesting question. It's right here before me. I like the title. No, but I mean, I love the character. I've used her in more in stories since this one because I'm writing stories that take place in this apartment complex with different situations and different characters. But I really just like her. I think she's quirky and strange and wonderful, and I would love to hang out with her. I love to hang out with her. And so, you know, I'm probably her, and I like her relationship with her boyfriend.
Yeah. So would you ever consider writing, when you're saying writing stories about the building, would they all be like a collection of short stories, or would you ever consider trying to weave that into a novel?
You know what? They are a collection right now, but I tried to write a novel from this story. And what happened was the crime, the problem, the conflict gets solved within the first, 12, 15 pages. And then what? Then it needs another plot, and it just didn't work. So I had to take that story out, and I continued with the novel, which now does not include this, and it's changed location. Now it takes place out in Silverado, not here. And I mean, the whole thing changed, but it just didn't work for me. It doesn't work for me to try to turn a short story into a novel. I don't know how people do that. I can see turning a novel into a short story, taking parts out and making a short story from it if the novel isn't working, but I don't know how to do that because, even essays, if anybody reads Modern Love in the New York Times, the essay column, I've seen essays in that column that are wonderful essays, and then they try to turn them into books by spreading them out and filling in. They never work as well for me, as a book. That may be just me, but yeah. So there is a collection of short stories, and quite a few take place at this place.
So are we going to be able to see that anytime soon, anywhere, or?
You know what? I sent it to an agent. An agent wanted to see it, and she wrote back to me 2 weeks later and said, "I love this. I had a hell of a good time, but I can't sell dark short stories right now. And so send me something else." So, send me your novel. So I did recently, but yeah. So hopefully someday, when times are not so dark, someone might want to publish it.
Yeah, it's funny. I didn't really get that feeling that it was dark.
Yeah, I don't either.
Maybe that's my my perspective, but
maybe we're just used to dark. I don't know.
That's speaking of dark, we have Greta Boris on here, whose story Ghost Walk was set in San Juan Capistrano, a place I know well, where I used to live, which was really, really interesting. And so I think for me, sometimes when I read a short story, I don't always feel like I get the payoff, even though the investment isn't as large as if you're reading a novel and the ending isn't satisfying. I still want that ending, not necessarily a happy ending, but I still want an ending to the story that resonates with me. So, I felt like I got that at the end of Ghost Walk. So maybe, Greta, maybe you could talk a little bit about Ghost Walk and the story and how you planned the payoff.
So when I originally wrote it, I didn't, and it was a really crappy story. So I went to the San Juan Capistrano Ghost Walk. They actually have an event like that. And I wanted to write a Halloween story. I can't remember why. My publisher wanted it for something or other. And so I kind of imagined this single mom who was bringing her daughter to this ghost walk, and some really weird things happen in the process of this ghost walk. And so I wrote that, and it was long and rambling and had too many characters, and it didn't go anywhere. But it had a lot of atmosphere. I really like atmosphere. But it was kind of like, so we were comparing everything to musicians. It's kind of like when a jazz musician kind of gets on a riff and they just keep going and they go way too long. So that's kind of what I did. And then I think I pitched it to a magazine or two, and they came back and it was sort of like, there's some good stuff in here, but this is way too long. And so
How long was it at that point, Greta? Do you remember?
7,000.
7,000 words.
So when the Crossing Borders thing came up, I had just sort of stuck it aside, doing other stuff. And when Crossing Borders came up, I thought, oh, that kind of fits. It's like crossing the border between the living world into the world of, you know, the afterlife and all that. And then I saw it was 5,000 words and I was like, you know, but it was the best thing ever because I chopped 2,000 words that didn't need to be there. And in the process of doing that, it really made me recognize that it needed a better payoff, like you said. And so so then I created that payoff. So I probably chopped more than 2,000 of the original words because then I added more. But there's nothing like to me, there's nothing like writing a story and putting it away for a while and then coming back and reading it with fresh eyes. And you see it more from the point of view of a reader, as opposed to the point of view of this, like the artiste who's just having fun with all this glorious atmosphere and everything. And you go, oh, well, if I was a reader, I wouldn't like blah, 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 blah. And then you can fix blah, 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 blah. So that was really, that was kind of, it was much better after I chopped a bunch of words out of it.
So when you initially wrote the story, did you have a sense of the emotional storyline as you did after you edited it, or?
Yeah, I did know that I wanted it to be this this single mom who you get this, you learn as the story goes that the father of her child who's with her is dead, and that she's bitter, and she, you know, she really is bitter and unhappy about something, and you don't completely know what that is until the end of the story. It sort of unravels as you go. And I knew I wanted it to be that, like it's a message from the grave that would heal her heart and heal the bitterness. You know, that I knew because so even though we talk about it being dark, a Halloween story, I guess I wanted it also to have kind of an uplifting end. My headset keeps moving. Yeah, sorry about that. And so I wanted it to have kind of an upswing at the end. And I think it did, and I hope it did. And that's hopefully what also made it satisfying.
It sort of had a sixth sense sort of feel to it a little bit. You knew something was not right and that something was going to happen, but you didn't know what. So the suspense that you created doing it that way was really interesting.
Oh, good. I'm glad. I was hoping it wouldn't be too. You know, was funny because Matt Coyle was my editor, and it was one of those things that Lisa was talking about where just a sentence or two changes things. Mm-hmm. I was so worried about being transparent and giving away the twist that Matt came back and he went, so I think this is the twist. Am I right? And I'm like, yeah, you're right. Okay. Obviously need to make it a little more obvious. So, yeah, if you can fool the brilliant Matt Coyle, you know, maybe you fooled a little too much. So I had to be a little more transparent, but.
Yeah. So the premise of the story, why that story? Why did you write that story and pick those characters and that setting? Did it just come together, or just?
Well, when you go on that ghost walk in San Juan, several of the ghosts that they have actors acting out these different ghosts that are supposed to haunt Los Rios Street, you know, in San Juan Capistrano. Several of the ghosts are women who horrible things have happened to them, and often at the hands of men. So there's a La Llorona, which is like a very traditional story about a woman who's romanced by, what do you call it? A soldier. And she has a whole bunch of kids by him, and then he goes off and he's going to get his fortune and come back and marry her. And he goes off, and when he comes back with a wife, and she drowns all her kids. It's really uplifting story. And then there was a couple of other, so those are the true stories. So I guess I wanted to kind of take this bitter woman story and twist it and make it a happier, I mean, it's still sad, he's dead, but it's still a happier end. in a sense. So I think that was really why I was inspired to use this embittered single woman, single mother, and switch up the fate.
It worked really well. It worked
Well,
really
thank you,
well.
Maddie.
Yeah. So this is for the whole panel, and anybody can chime in. Why is it that you think people love mysteries so much? And why is it that mystery short stories seem to do better than, at least from things that I've read, do better than short stories in other genres?
So for me,
Go ahead.
I think that people, that life, especially nowadays, is hard, and people like to see justice done. So it's a little bit of where you really understand who is good and who is bad, and that something happens to the bad people. So I think there's somewhat of a relief in that, in reading a mystery, where that happens. So.
I think the mystery genre and crime fiction in general has an inherent structure to it, because there's generally some kind of a mystery that needs to be solved. And I think that, humans, like Kathy was saying, kind of crave a certain amount of, we crave structure and resolution that we don't get in real life. So it's kind of an easy fix, right? Like our life stories don't wrap up in this kind of way. We don't always see justice and fair, et cetera, et cetera. And I also think that humans are sort of hardwired to want stories. I mean, that's how we make sense of our own experiences. So that would be my guess.
I guess I'm saying something very similar to what Lisa's saying, is that we seem to like the analytical puzzle side of it, but we want to combine with emotion. And he offers both of those. It's not like solving a math problem, it's solving a math problem, and it's something that affects you emotionally.
How about you, Barb?
Well, I was just thinking about that because I tend to like noir short stories. I don't necessarily read noir novels, but short stories. And in noir, things kind of go from bad to worse. And there is no like wonderful, victorious ending. And I'm like, why do I like that? I don't know. But I do. What can I say?
I like that too. I don't need a happy ending, and I don't even need complete resolution. I just, things have to resolve on some level,
Right.
But not on every level.
Right. Yeah, there has to be a resolution. I mean, there has to be a change, but if it's not a happy change, I'm okay with that.
Wow.
And how, when you were writing these short stories, how important was character? And I asked this question before, character versus plot. When you're writing a short story and you have people's attention for a short period of time, if you had to err on one side or the other, which would it be?
Well, for me, it's character, because I feel like a short story is, it can't be too much about, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, because it's boring. You just lose people. I think they want to see something through the eyes of, yet I'm saying plot is still important, but I think they want to see an event through the eyes of someone. It's sort of like the way you interpret life, and that, I agree that we're also hardwired for story. So the good thing about story is you can get in other people's heads and see how they would interpret life, how they would interpret these events. Mm-hmm. And so you learn something new from each of those experiences.
Anybody else on the panel?
I think character is really important, but you need something to propel the character into action, because it's through action that they really reveal themselves. And that's where the change happens. So I think they're both important.
That's interesting, because I think that, like for me, I used to used to be I only wrote literary short stories. And like I said, nothing ever happened. You know, I mean, there's all this character stuff. And so now I'm always kind of walking the line between character and plot, because if I don't have a plot, I'm going to be back where I started, which is, you know, interesting characters and nothing happens. So I don't think plot is more important than character, but I think there's that line you have to walk so that you're paying attention to both.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
I think different people look for different things in mystery. Some like the puzzle. But I think if there's a majority view, most mysteries, certainly the noir mysteries, reflect our feelings, rightly or wrongly, that it's an unjust world.
No.
The good will die young and the wicked of old age in their beds. And I see that quite a bit.
Which
To
is,
me, oh, go ahead.
no, I was going to say, which is one of the reasons I think that these stories appeal to people. And I don't know if Kathy, if anybody wanted to jump in before I ask this next question, which is, do you feel like the appetite, readers' appetites are changing because of the way news and stories are delivered on streaming and on the internet and some of those things? Do you think people's appetites are changing towards wanting shorter stories, or?
Oh,
Gosh, I don't know, Maddie. I mean, I think we love short stories because of attention span for sure. But so what I wonder then is, why are publishers saying they just don't sell? Is it because they're collected in a volume and that we like one short story in a magazine or journal, you know, one at a time and not a whole book of them? I don't know.
Well, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, it's almost like having, you know, that dopamine shot that you get with a short story that sometimes takes a little longer in a novel. I mean, you get that resolution and in a short period of time, and you don't have to make the commitment necessarily to read the whole story before you get that, like Jack was saying, that resolution of that sense of justice. Or is it lifestyle? And do you ever think about that when you write your books? Do you think about the reader and what they're going to be doing at the time that they read your book, or do you just write your story and the story comes out the way it comes out? The panel. That's
I think about the reader. I think the reader's important. You know, we're not writing just for ourselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I know one thing that's really, you know, Breaking Bad kind of broke a mold, and it took a lot of more drama, crime type television into a serial format, a very popular serial format. And I think when people invest in characters and they invest in a world, if they like it, they want more of it. So I don't know that length is always as important as that you're getting more of that world. So for instance, Barbara's short story collection that she's going to publish one way or another one of these days, because I'll bug her until she does, is a set character in a setting. So even though they're snippets of this character's life, I could see people binging that, because if you love that character and she's an awesome character and you love the setting, you're just going to want to be there. I think sometimes an anthology like the one we're all in, it's wonderful. And I think a lot of writers will really love it, because you get to see so many different styles and approaches and all that kind of a thing. But they're all very different. So, you know, if you fall in love with Carl's little boy in Colombia, you're only going to get 10, 12 pages of him, and then you're going to get stuck with My Bitter Single Mom. So it's a different, you know, it's a different kind of world. So you got to be a little more, you know, some people when they go to the chocolate I am one of them. I cut them all open and I only eat like 2 of the kinds, and the rest I don't care. So some people are like that. You know, they
Greta,
want
you're not sneaky enough. You have to poke a hole in the bottom
Oh,
and then put them back so nobody knows that you've.
yeah,
That's what my mom did.
yeah.
do
So
you think short stories permit more
devious one.
ambiguity than novels?
More ambiguity. That's interesting.
So multiple interpretations, the reader really
Right.
has to think.
But doesn't that happen with novels all the time, though? It means something different to each reader. You know, different readers pull out different themes, and the writer goes, "What the heck? I didn't know I was writing about that." I don't
Yeah.
know. That's interesting.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting that you asked that question, Carl, because
Why?
the ending of your story is, I mean, it's not ambiguous, but and it's resolved, but it also gives you a feeling that there's a lot more to come, you know, that might just be the beginning. So, you know, I don't know. I think when I look at that, maybe there is more tolerance for ambiguity because the investment is not as intense. If you sit down and you read 300 or 400 pages and you get like a feeling like, oh, this is just the beginning, you're like, oh, maybe why did I read those 400 pages? So maybe there's more of a tolerance for that. I don't know.
Well, I mean, and a poem is shorter than a short story, and there's much more ambiguity in poems. So I don't know if length is it, but yeah.
But I think, oh, go ahead, Kath.
No, I was just thinking the years ago when I just started writing the short stories, I read a lot of them, and I think it's true. I think there's plenty of them, especially mysteries, are left unresolved, not unresolved, but ambiguous, where you're really not sure what's going to happen next. So that's a good thing to pick up.
Well, Colette in the chat, she has a collection of short stories, and she said, "I think short stories demand greater clarity in the writing, but more open-endedness regarding resolution." And I think that's so true.
Yeah.
With a novel, if you end a novel and it's kind of vague, the ending is vague, as a reader, I don't know, I may not be interested in reading the next novel from that writer, but short stories, I don't want them to be so wrapped up at the end that you know exactly what's happening.
If you read the stories of Alice Munro, I mean, it's really flat.
Yeah,
And yet, wow, yeah, the themes and the characters she deals with just explode.
Do you all think about theme when you're writing stories or longer fiction novels? Are you thinking theme, or are you letting the reader come up with themes?
I think of theme at the end of the process. Like, you know, what are the elements that came out not even aware of or not necessarily aware of, and do those form into some kind of theme? And is there something I need to emphasize to bring that out more? I never think about it at the beginning.
Yeah.
You know, as far as that and approaching writing a story, we have Kim Keyline on the panel. Well, she's not on the panel, but she's with us today. But she's a contributor to Crossing Borders, which, if anybody has forgotten, that's why we're here. Yeah, thank you, Barb, for holding that up. So, oh, everybody, I like it. Where's mine? So, Kim, maybe you could just share briefly what it was like for you. This is your first publication, right? Or first short story?
Yes, it was my first short story and my first publication, and Lisa was my editor, and as I said in the comments, she really helped me make it better. And yeah, so I read a couple short stories. I'd never read mystery short stories much, other than maybe Sherlock Holmes when I was young, maybe some Agatha Christie's. And so I talked to Kathy, and she lent me an anthology of modern short stories that I could read, and I looked through them and kind of went, huh, limited characters, you can't do too much scene switching. And so I just sort of, I think my story takes place in an hour and there's 2 people. And because I realized that if you're going to do it that short, you need to be very focused. And I guess it worked because it got published. So
The way you describe it doesn't sound very painful. Was it painful for you?
I don't know, not painful. I guess I just got lucky. It was a fun story to write.
She's very talented. Her second book is in the Bouchercon anthology that's coming.
Oh,
Mm.
my second short story, yeah.
The
Got
second story she
accepted.
ever wrote is in the Bouchercon one. She's very talented.
So the Bouchercon, was that a short story?
Yeah, so the Bouchercon anthology, which is on pre-order right now, comes out next month. And my second short story, I submitted there and it got accepted. I've got 2 more that are still waiting. So I've written 4 short stories so far, 2 of which are published and 2 of which are still out because it takes forever to hear back from places.
Right.
Mm.
Okay. All right. I guess we could open it up to questions. It would probably be easier since we're recording if you have questions to put them in the chat. So because of Zoom, it has some limitations, and if 2 people are speaking at the same time, it tends to have some sort of Darwinian thing that it picks one. So if you have questions for our panel, please feel free to put them in the chat room. I have one question that I wanted to ask while you're thinking about your questions or your comments. When you finished this and you knew that you were in this publication, and then it came out, and we were talking about this a little bit beforehand, the COVID situation happened and you could not go out to promote it. Maybe other things are going on that you don't feel like this is your primary purpose. How do you go about promoting your book, or do you promote your stories, or how do you promote like a short story as opposed to a book?
Wow.
The issue is that like 4 at least of the people in the short story also were volunteering quite a bit for Left Coast Crime, so not being able to do the anthology launch was a little heartbreaking. I think we all took a break because, you know, the world was broken, so we didn't want to be saying, hey, buy my book. But then we started doing some social media, and then Barbara hosted Lisa and I on her podcast. So, but yeah, any ideas are appreciated. Kim has a bunch of books in her house, I think.
Yeah, the promotion aspect is really difficult. I mean, there's so much going on now, though, and there's a newsletter or a weekly mailing that I can put it in the chat, because every week now, every Sunday, I get a list of book events, virtual book events, and I put this one in there. I don't know if anybody came from that, but you know, it's kind of a, yeah, it's great. I'll put it in the chat so you can all go and subscribe or do whatever you want. But other than that, I mean, gosh, you know, all the different bookstores, everybody's doing things, but independently, what do you do, right?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. How do you promote a story versus a book? You know, it's not that it deserves any less promotion or any less attention necessarily, but
you tell your friends.
You tell your friends. Yeah, we know what people are getting for Christmas. But I think, you know, if you enjoy short stories and you enjoy mystery writing or reading that, not only buying books, but also reviewing books. So if you did purchase Crossing Borders, if you would post a review, that's a great thing. Like Barbara said, tell your friends. And this is not just for Crossing Borders. This is for any book or any author that you're looking to find a way to support. If you can't always buy their books, there are plenty of other ways that you can help them and move this along. And you know, one of the nice things about that I found in Sisters in Crime is that everybody is so generous in their cross promotion of other writers and support. So, you know, you do that for someone someday, they do that for you when it's your time. So I think that's one of the nice things about being part of a community like this. And I think the mystery community is a very tight-knit, close community because of that. You know, everybody's interested in what you're writing and what's happening, and not only that, but how they can help. So if you're a writer and you're looking for a community, a mystery writer, or even a thriller writer, if you're looking for a community that offers you support like that, Sisters in Crime is a great place to find that. Okay, so let's go through some of the chat here and see what we have here. Oh, Kim agrees with me. She says the mystery community is the best community. Well, we're going to have to take on the horror community and some of the literary community, and we'll probably win. So that would be fun. Let's see what else we have here. So Jack says, don't you think that there are exceptions to every rule? For instance, it was rightly pointed out that resolutions can be more ambiguous in short stories. However, Faulkner's A Rose for Emily can be regarded as a mystery story steeped in ambiguity. However, the last sentence resolves the mystery with brutal and horrifying clarity. Okay, so anybody want to take that?
Wait,
No?
what? Sorry, hang on.
The question?
Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
So I think the question is, don't you think that there are exceptions to every rule? And we were talking, I think Jack was asking more specifically about resolutions, or the hypothesis that resolutions can be more ambiguous in short stories.
Oh, I have no idea. That's
yeah, that's up there. That's up there.
Well, yeah, they can be, you know, I mean, I think we talked about that a little earlier, that we don't have the same expectations from a short story that we have of a novel.
And
Well, have most people read A Rose for Emily?
I have not.
It's been years.
I will not spoil it. It's not a long story. Look it up as soon as you get a chance. And maybe it's just because Faulkner is a Nobel Prize winning author that he could buck the rules on mysteries. But this is a clear exception. You think it's going to be ambiguous, and in the very last sentence, poof, and you wish it had remained ambiguous.
Yeah, well, you know, it's funny you say ambiguous. I mean, it's so, I think that's a word that you use with mysteries, especially mystery novels, because the mystery novels bleed into so many other genres, and they have different elements and strong elements of romance or humor or horror. You know, it's something that transcends, it almost transcends genre. You know, there's noir, and there are all aspects of that, and there are so many different parts of that. So I think when you do like a mystery anthology like this, you open it up to every genre, to writers of every genre. So the skill in writing a mystery transcends just what you think traditional mysteries should be, which makes it such an interesting thing to talk about. You know, and I think for Lisa, you probably saw lots of different genres coming in, or takes on mystery than you even expected.
Oh yeah, I mean, we had some pretty traditional whodunits. We had things that were far more sort of mood pieces. We had supernatural elements, like with Greta's story. We had, you know, speculative fiction with Kathy's. Things that were more suspense driven. Yeah, you know, crime fiction encompasses a lot. And I think the way that it's been broken down into all these little sort of subgenres is one of the more interesting things about it. It's a vehicle to tell us the way you want to. And it's interesting because I've read for big contests before, and one of the questions that we'll have about some of the books is like, wait a minute, was this science fiction? Or was this a mystery? Was this crime fiction? I don't know. What is this? You know, we know it when we see it.
You know, I also think in terms of the ambiguity question, crime fiction or mystery, like one thing it's famous for is having some kind of early hook. You know, whether it's Agatha Christie's The Dead Body is Laying in the Library Floor, or it's a foreshadowing that you just know something, you know, is coming. Like even Barbara's story, where there's this woman who's collecting things from the pool. You kind of know as soon as you get that hook that she's going to find something creepy in the pool. And I was just glad it wasn't a body part, you know? So, but I think that hook early on, that's what it's the promise of the premise. That's what we have to provide at the end. So we don't have to give every little tiny thread all real wrapped up, but we have to deliver what we promised when we set that hook in the beginning, or you're going to end up with a disappointed reader. So, to me, that's where it is. And, sometimes you over deliver and you have to dial it back, and that's what a good editor's for. And sometimes you under deliver and you have to amp it up a little. And again, that's what you need an editor for. But I think we all have to kind of aim, especially in a short story, it's kind of like you got to get the basketball from one end of the court to the other. You got one goal, get it in the hoop. So, that's how I think of it anyway.
I like that, Greta, the promise of the premise.
Yeah.
That should
really
be a
good.
t-shirt, slogan.
I don't think I made it up, but I wish I did.
I heard it before. You can have it.
Okay, Lisa, I made it. But I use it, when I teach workshops and stuff like that, it just resonates with me. It's like, I'm making a promise, I got to deliver.
I think that's really cool, because one of the things that stood out to me when I read these stories, particularly the stories of our panel today, is that hook. They all had an incredible hook that was that as the reader, I could very clearly repeat without being hit over the head with it. Kathy, your story, I mean, it was very clear, you had the log line, the premise really clear in your head about, the flu virus that goes out to kill somebody, but they're already dead. And right away, what kind of story you're going to get if it's executed. But it's not, just because you know the story doesn't mean it's always going to be executed well. You did both, so we got the bonus of that. But, that's true. Every one of you, when you talked about your story, nobody went on and on about what their story was. It was like quick. So it had been distilled down to its very essence. And I think that's one of the things that came out for me in the writing reading the short stories and about writing. If you can't distill it like that, you're going to have a really hard time writing your short story.
I wonder, is it easier to do that with short stories than novels? I know, they want you to have a pitch line for your novel, but it seems a lot more difficult to come up with that because there's so many moving parts to a novel, whereas a short story, it's usually pretty simple, right? A couple of characters, a couple of settings at most, maybe an A and B story, and that's about it.
I don't know. I usually can, I'm not somebody that does elevator pitches out loud or something like that, but I've written the jacket copy of most of my own books. Because it's just like, oh, how about this? Oh, yeah, we'll use that. It's just sort of like, okay, well, if I think of it literally as that, if I'm reading the jacket flap, what do I put? And it's not always even completely accurate. Sometimes it's kind of a lie. Not a total lie, but it's like you emphasize, you tell it in a way that suggests more clarity or, cohesion than there may be. That's what I do anyway. So now you know.
You are a fiction writer, so I think
we can make stuff up.
Yeah.
I have a publishing story where I wrote the synopsis and then sent the book in, and the Amazon description, which I hadn't seen, was based on my synopsis and not the final version, which changed quite a bit. So I had to scramble and put some things back in so that Amazon actually happened. So.
That's an important thing. Okay, so I have a comment here from Claire Murray, who's referring back to one of our previous conversations about promoting your material and your work. It says, I'm beginning to make very short video clips using explainer video software to tell about my short stories. I put them on YouTube and post to social media, my website, etc. About every sci-fi book I've read has also been a mystery, but would never have been labeled as such. That's interesting.
It is.
Okay, thanks, Claire. Carl, what were you going to say?
I wasn't.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's really great. Okay, if Does anybody else have any questions or comments? We're going to open it up. And if not, we're going to let everybody go. And again, offer them our thanks for being with us here today and sharing their insights. We can't wait to read your stories. I highly recommend Crossing Borders. Take it with you wherever you go. If you have to wait in line in your favorite restaurant for social distancing or whatever, that's a great thing to carry around with you and read wherever you go. Again, the link to Mystery Inc. is in our chat room. And I want to thank, on behalf of our panel, Barbara DeMarco, Carl Vonderau, Lisa Brackmann, Kim Keyline. Well, Kim, you were on here too. Greta Boris and Kathy Krevat. Did I get that right? Krevat. I want to thank you all for being here, and please stay safe and keep writing until we see you next month.
And thank you,
Nice
Maddie.
Thank you,
meeting
Maddie.
all.
Yeah.
Thank
Yes,
you.
thanks,
Stay
Maddie.
healthy.
Maddie.
It was fun. We'll see you all next month.
All right.
Okay.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.